We thought inheriting a collapsed observatory would be our second chance at life, until the telescope inside started moving on its own, and the night we finally looked through it, we realized it wasn't searching the sky. It was waiting for something that already knew we were there. It all started the day we were kicked out. No warning, no backup plan, just a quiet, "You're adults now," and a door closing behind us like it had been waiting years to do that. And I remember standing there with my sister Lila, her fingers gripping my sleeve like if she let go, the world would pull her somewhere worse. And maybe it already had, because we didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even look back. We just walked down the cracked pavement, past neighbors who pretended not to see, carrying everything we owned in 2 bags that suddenly felt too light for what we'd just lost. We made it to the bus station by evening, sitting on a cold metal bench under flickering lights, and for a while we didn't talk, just listened to engines come and go, like everyone else had somewhere to be except us, until my phone buzzed in my pocket, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize and a message that didn't make sense at first, regarding the estate of Dr. Elias Varon. "You were listed as next of kin." And I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like a mistake, like the universe had dialed the wrong number, because we didn't have family left to inherit anything from, just silence and distance, and people who had already decided we weren't worth keeping. But the message was real, and 2 days later, after a long ride through roads that got emptier the further we went, we found ourselves standing at the base of a hill, staring up at something that looked less like a gift and more like a warning. The observatory sat alone against the sky, its dome partially caved in like something had crushed it from above, metal panels bent and rusted, windows shattered, the whole structure leaning just enough to make you question whether it was safe to even get close. And Lila let out this small breath beside me, half laugh, half disbelief, and said, "This is ours." Like she expected someone to step out and tell us it was a joke. But no one came. No voice corrected her. Just the wind moving through broken glass and the distant hum of nothing at all. And when we pushed the door open, it groaned like it hadn't been touched in years, the sound echoing deeper than it should have, as if the place was bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside. And maybe it was, because the moment we stepped in, the air changed. It wasn't just dusty or stale, it was heavy, like the building had been holding its breath and we'd just interrupted it. Papers were scattered across the floor, some pinned under fallen beams, others curled at the edges like they'd tried to escape something. Old equipment sat under cloth sheets that had collected layers of dust so thick you could draw lines through them. And everywhere we looked there were signs of abandonment, but not the slow kind, not the natural decay of time. Instead it felt sudden, like whoever had been here had left in a hurry and never came back, and that thought stuck with me as we moved further inside, our footsteps the only sound in a place that should have been echoing with more than just us. "I don't like it," Lila said quietly, staying close, her voice barely carrying in the open space. And I nodded even though I didn't want to admit I felt the same, because this was all we had now, broken or not, and turning back wasn't really an option anymore. So we kept going until we reached the center of the observatory, where the dome opened above us in a jagged circle of exposed sky. And that's where we saw it. The telescope, standing tall in the middle of the ruin like it didn't belong to the same world as everything else, untouched by the collapse, its metal frame clean, its lens clear, its structure perfectly aligned as if someone had been maintaining it daily despite the years of neglect surrounding it. And Lila stepped closer before I could stop her, tilting her head as she studied it. "Why is this the only thing that's not broken?" she asked, and I didn't have an answer, because she was right. It didn't make sense, not with the state of everything else, not with how long this place had supposedly been abandoned, and yet there it was, intact, almost deliberate, like it had been protected, or preserved, or left behind for a reason we hadn't figured out yet. We spent the rest of the day clearing a small space to sleep, pushing aside debris, laying out what little we had, trying to convince ourselves this place could work, that we could make something out of it. And by the time night fell, exhaustion hit hard enough that even the unease faded into the background, the sky above us stretching open through the broken dome, stars scattered across it in a way that almost felt peaceful if you didn't think too much about where you were. And for a while, lying there beside Lila, listening to her breathing steady as she drifted off, I let myself believe maybe this could be the start of something better, that maybe getting kicked out had somehow led us here for a reason. But then, just as I was about to fall asleep, something shifted, a faint metallic sound, subtle but out of place, and my eyes opened immediately, locking onto the telescope, because even in the dim light, I could see it clearly, the way it stood against the sky, and for a second I told myself it was nothing, just the structure settling, the wind catching something loose, anything that made sense, until it happened again, slower this time, more deliberate, the entire mechanism turning just a few degrees on its axis with a precision no broken machine should have. And I felt my chest tighten as I pushed myself up onto my elbows, staring at it, waiting for it to stop, for it to prove me wrong. But it didn't. It just held there in its new position, aimed at a different part of the sky, like it had decided something, like it had found something worth looking at. And in that moment, lying on the cold floor of a place we barely understood, I realized something I couldn't explain away. The observatory wasn't dead. It hadn't been abandoned. Not really, because something inside it was still working, still watching, and whatever that telescope was pointed at now. It wasn't random, it was intentional. The telescope wasn't searching the sky. It was tracking something, and the second night made that impossible to ignore. I didn't tell Lila everything at first, because saying it out loud would make it real, and we had just started convincing ourselves this ruined observatory could actually be a place to survive, maybe even start over. But sleep didn't come easy after what I'd seen, so I stayed awake, lying still, eyes locked on the silhouette of the telescope under the broken dome, listening to every creak and whisper of wind, trying to separate imagination from reality, until at exactly 2:17 a.m., it moved again, slow, precise, deliberate, rotating just a few degrees with a clean mechanical sound that didn't belong in a place this abandoned, and my chest tightened as I sat up quickly, heart pounding. "Lila," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up, now." She groaned at first, half asleep, but then the telescope shifted again, sharper this time, and her eyes snapped open as she followed my gaze, both of us going completely still as it settled into a new position, like it had just corrected itself, like it knew exactly where to look. "That's not broken," she said quietly, and I nodded, already getting to my feet, because there was only one way to understand what was happening, even if every instinct told me not to. "I'm checking it," I muttered, climbing the narrow metal steps, each one creaking loudly in the silence. And when I reached the top, I hesitated for just a second, my hand hovering near the eyepiece, because up close, it felt wrong, colder than the rest of the room, like it didn't belong to the same air. But curiosity pushed me forward, and I leaned in, pressing my eye to the lens. At first, just stars, endless and sharp, more detailed than I'd ever seen, and for a brief second I almost relaxed, thinking this could still be explained, until one of them moved and I froze, blinking hard, adjusting the focus slowly with shaking fingers, watching as that single point of light grew larger, darker, until it became something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the sky at all, a massive shape, uneven and structured, not drifting like anything natural, but moving with intention. And the longer I stared, the more certain I became that it wasn't just moving, it was getting closer. "What do you see?" Lila called from below, her voice tense now, and I didn't answer right away, because as I watched, the telescope adjusted again on its own, a smooth mechanical shift that centered the object perfectly, like it had done this before, like it knew exactly where to point. And that thought hit harder than anything else, because it meant this wasn't new. This had been happening long before we arrived. "It's not a star," I finally said, my voice low, tight, pulling back just slightly but not enough to stop looking, because some part of me couldn't. "Then what is it?" she asked, stepping closer, and I swallowed, forcing the words out even as they sounded raw. "I don't know. But it's big." And the silence that followed felt heavier than anything else, until Lila said something that made my stomach drop, something I hadn't realized until she pointed it out. "Then why does it feel like the telescope isn't following it?" she said slowly. "Why does it feel like it already knows where it's going to be?" And I felt a chill run through me, because she was right. The movements weren't reactive, they were precise, predictive, like the telescope wasn't searching the sky, but waiting for something to arrive at a specific point. And as I leaned in one last time, just to be sure. The shape in the lens shifted again, slightly larger now, slightly clearer, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I had the unmistakable feeling that it wasn't just moving through space. It was moving toward us, toward this exact place, like it had been given coordinates, like it had been called. And then the telescope made one final adjustment, a sharp, decisive movement that locked it into place, the mechanism humming faintly as it settled, and I slowly pulled away, my heart pounding harder than ever, because deep down, I already knew the truth I didn't want to say out loud. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't passing by, and the telescope wasn't just watching it, it was waiting for it to get here. The observatory was never abandoned. It was waiting, and the moment we understood that was the moment it was already too late. By morning, the fear had settled into something colder, sharper, the kind that makes you move even when you don't want to. So we searched the place properly, digging through scattered papers and broken equipment until we found the journals, dozens of them, all written by the same man, Dr. Elias Varon. And every page said the same thing in different ways, that something was out there, that it kept returning, that it wasn't random, and worst of all, that it could see him watching it. And as I flipped faster, my hands started shaking because the entries became more frantic, more desperate, like he'd realized something too late, like we had. The telescope doesn't detect it, one line read. It responds to it. And Lila whispered, "What does that even mean?" But I already knew, because deep down it matched the feeling I couldn't explain. It meant the telescope wasn't just a tool, it was part of something that connected us to whatever was out there. And the second that thought formed, a low hum filled the room, subtle at first, then growing, vibrating through the metal beneath our feet, and we both turned slowly toward the center of the observatory as the telescope began to move again, faster than before, sharper, almost urgent, adjusting itself in quick, precise bursts until it snapped into a final position pointing straight up through the broken dome. And then it stopped, completely still, the hum rising into a steady tone as a faint light flickered inside the lens, not shining out, but receiving, like a signal locking in. Lila grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," but I couldn't answer, because the last page of the journal was already open in my hand. The words burned into my mind. Asterisk, if anyone finds this, leave. It doesn't just get closer. It arrives. Asterisk, and as if on cue, the sound came from above. Not thunder, not wind, but something deeper, heavier, like the sky itself was tearing open, and we ran outside without thinking, stumbling into the cold air, looking up at a sky that at first seemed normal, unchanged, until the stars began to shift, not flickering, not fading, but moving, slowly pulling apart like something was forcing its way through them, creating a dark, empty space where nothing should exist. And in that gap, something massive began to appear, not falling, not flying, just emerging, piece by piece, a shape too large to understand all at once. And I felt Lila's hand tighten around mine as she whispered, "What do we do?" But I couldn't answer, because the truth had already settled in, heavy and final. We hadn't just inherited a broken building. We had inherited a signal, something that had been calling out for years, maybe decades. And the moment we stepped inside, the moment we watched, the moment we looked through that telescope, we had answered it. And now whatever was out there didn't have to search anymore, didn't have to guess, because it knew exactly where we were. And as the humming from the observatory grew louder behind us, and the thing in the sky became clearer, closer, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't that it was arriving. It was that it had always been coming, and we had just told it that someone was still here waiting.